So all weather events are affected by climate change because the environment in which they occur is warmer and moister than it used to be. So the typical question really doesn't apply. Here we see if the world's population, come on in.
Thank you.
If the world's population lived like Bangladesh, we'd have plenty of resources. If it lived like China, we'd be running a little bit short. As we live, we'd need 4 Earths. So, you know, that's something to keep in mind about our lifestyle. And there's 7.6 billion people on Earth now. This was a few years ago, but it shows you, you know, China has now exceeded the US in carbon footprint, but they have 4 times the population that we do. Europe has a smaller footprint than the US, even though it has more population. So we've got some choices. We can choose mitigation, adaptation, or misery. And we get to choose by how we act. That's what it'll determine which of those 3 and in what combination. So if rich and rising countries are creating the problem of climate change, who's most harmed by it? The poor. And this is a very typical scene that you would see in Central America at bus stops. So the U.S. greenhouse gas emission tally for 2014 looked like this. So 84% of our greenhouse gas footprint was in the energy sector, with electric power and transportation the biggest parts. Industrial energy and residential and so on are smaller parts. This shows state by state and who's growing and who's shrinking. Texas is growing the most, but Arkansas we're 3rd.
Oh my God.
Wow.
And you know that relates to the Turk plant, basically. That reflects the Turk plant. More recent data shows that transportation has actually exceeded our carbon footprint for electricity. So transportation is really has become the big kahuna. And this is a world chart. So you can see, you know, the proportions for electric power, 29 and 27 there. And then a couple of years later they crossed. This is a few years ago, and it shows transportation as a smaller part on a global basis. And electricity is indeed the biggest single contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. And you can see some of the other contributors, including land use changes. And the species that are of concern, carbon dioxide is 77% of the problem, methane is about 14%, nitrous oxide is about 8%. And then we've got these things that are becoming a growing concern.
What is that? I can't.
That's fluorines, you know, like refrigerants. Refrigerants can be really bad. They can be like, on a weight basis, they can be 1,500 or 2,500 times worse on a weight basis than carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide can be used as a cooling fluid, as a coolant itself. And some companies are experimenting with that.
How long do the CFCs age, if the PFCs age? How long do they stay in the atmosphere?
A long time.
As long as carbon dioxide?
No, I don't know. I'm not sure. But their rating is very high.
Can they be sequestered? I mean, I'm maybe jumping ahead, but
I don't know.
I know carbon can, you know, they're attempting to do that, but I wondered if you could ever bring those back.
You know, refrigerators and air conditioners are supposed to be recycled. You know,
Oh,
the
I meant
material
out
is
of the
supposed to
air,
be
yeah.
recycled. But it's a big concern because there's lots of leakage.
Yeah.
So, you know, right now we've got 77% of the problem is carbon dioxide. This is thought that this will grow fast if we don't pay attention to it, if we don't use more sensitive, you know, more sensible coolants.
And also with the developing countries with large populations hoping to improve their economic situation, that will most likely lead to more use of these
Air conditioners, yeah, exactly.
They want what we got.
Yeah, well, yeah. I'd like to be comfortable too, but,
There's gonna be a huge demand for cooling in the tropics, because as temperatures ramp up, there are gonna be many more days in which it will have to be absolutely lethal
to be outside.
Not
to
just the
be,
tropics.
to beat the ambient temperature.
Absolutely.
I
Yes,
think I noticed that daylight savings is coming upon us next week or something
Yes.
like that. And
next weekend.
it seems to me we would save quite a bit of cooling energy and refrigerants if we didn't have daylight savings time.
Well, the logic is that it uses less energy, but I
Same
don't,
amount of time.
Oh,
yeah, same amount of time, that's true. But there's more evening hour, you know, more evening
Yeah.
light, so I don't know.
and the days are longer when
Yeah.
when you add that artificial ingredient of making them longer.
Yeah, nobody likes it, that's for sure. Our baseline is terrible. You know, this is up through 2030. This is business as usual. The current policy trajectory is this mustard color. The unconditional NDC case, that's got to do with the Paris commitments. The conditional NDC case is, you know, people who made extra pledges or whatever, but aren't necessarily going to hold to it. But as you can see, these two are nowhere near what's needed to stay within 2 degrees centigrade rise, or 1.5 degrees centigrade rise was what the hope was at Paris. And then you see this projected, this is just that projected out to 2050. This is our SWEPCO, so the local provider. Right now they've got 44% coal and 45% natural gas, which both generate carbon dioxide emissions. So we're at 89%, and they're including energy efficiency and demand response as a 3% solution. So I don't know if that's kosher or not. So they say that their energy mix is 8% wind right now. And you see the main power plants, Turk, Flint Creek. Turk, I think, is actually generating and selling into Texas. I don't think the Arkansas PSC allowed them to sell into Arkansas. But and then part of their system is out in the Texas Panhandle. ERCOT is below and within those areas. This is what their goal was up until this year, within the past year. So for 2034, they were projecting to still have 67% natural gas and coal. They've advanced that a little bit. I think 2022 is when they're supposed to get that wind farm online. Yes.
I didn't see the nuke plant down Dardanelle on that map.
Well, because this is SWEPCO. The new plant is at energy. So that's not in our service territory. So they're expecting to get to this 29% solar and wind by I think 2022, as it is now. But in any case, it's not up to the task. It's not up to what's needed. not even close. Now, some consequences, we could talk about global consequences, but we have a consequence right here, very locally, increased flooding. Now, when these buildings were built, they were outside the floodplain. But as you can see, this building has a little corner of it that's in the floodplain, so then the building gets classified as being in the floodplain. So we're already feeling effects locally in addition to the effects globally.
Terry, I can't see where that is from.
That's,
back here. Where is
Leverett.
the river?
Okay, this is Leverett and Lawson.
And the water source is, I just can't see from here, what's the water
Skull
source?
Creek.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's the
Skull
creek
Creek.
that runs along the bike trail.
Okay, great, thanks.
And this is, droughts that are, you can see the change in trajectory of the numbers of droughts, and it's increasing in Arizona. This is just a different way of presenting that drought data. So already, we have an estimated 150,000 deaths annually due to climate change.
Terry, could you specify some of that? Is some of that due to toxins, or is that climate change effects like storms, droughts?
Yeah, storm droughts, and yeah, the next slide I'll show some, but we're in the middle of the most drastic change in the last 10,000 years at least. If the minimum change,
As far as extremes.
temperature rise.
And the heat waves are actually the largest source of deaths. They're not as, dramatic until you don't cause them as much, but heat waves are really the cause of the majority of deaths.
Yes, and you can see where the deaths are concentrated. It's the people who have the least resources to deal with it and have caused the problem the least, but they're suffering the most.
They're counting starvation?
Yeah, here's the hunger map. So this is mostly due to drought. And this is hunger map. So this is a house here in Fayetteville. And the point here is, even if you have 99 solar panels, it's not enough to counteract an inefficiently built house. You want to use efficient building techniques. So this covers less than half of that home's electric demand.
Wow. Do you know how big that house is?
It's about a 5,000 square foot house.
No, it's not.
Okay.
I was personally involved in that. That's 8,500 square feet.
Okay.
And a great deal of that consumption is attributable to occupant behavior.
Right. So now we'll get into the home. So this, in contrast to an inefficiently built house, the lower walls here are ICF in insulated concrete forms. So these are the forms, and you pour concrete down the middle to give it structure. So that's a very good insulation value.
That's the foundation?
Yeah, the lower walls in the bottom floor. When we take a tour later, I can show you. And part of the hilltop and hillside ordinance is to protect trees. So we had to clad this tree right there in 2x4s to protect it during construction. So that's what that's about. Here you see the foam insulation, the blown foam insulation, and that gets into all the crevices. It's a good sealant. So it not only has insulation value, but it seals.
What kind of, what's that foam made of?
I think there was a company that was selling a bio-based, in fact, that was the name of the company, bio-based. This is a successor to that bio-based process. The bio-based company went bankrupt. But, you know, there's an attempt to use more friendly materials, yes.
How much more expensive is this compared to regular insulation?
I think Scott knows better than I do.
Well, in general, blown-in foam is going to be considerably more expensive than say, blowing in cellulose. And you might ask, how do you blow in cellulose and expect it to stick on a wall like that? Well, it's moistened, and then it dries in place.
But the cellulose doesn't seal. So this is more expensive, but you have the additional advantage of sealing.
Correct, yeah.
And you put a netting
leaks.
over the wall to keep the cellulose in.
Right.
I know from experience.
Yeah.
But the cellulose has, you know, air passages, so it breathes, this seals.
But you gotta watch out for that expanding stuff, because some of it has really nasty emissions, and there are people who have done their homes and tried to live in them and could not do it. They got sick.
Well, again, this particular material is like the bio-based material.
Yeah.
And so they shave it, you know, they spray it on and then they shave it down.
Right.
And if, you know, when a conventional wall is finished, if you take a picture of it with an infrared camera, you can see the studs, right?
Mm-hmm.
They've used building techniques to avoid that, so that the studs don't. In conventional building, the studs would be a conductor. It would conduct energy either from outside to in or inside to out, depending on summer or winter.
So what you're saying is the foam kind of keeps it all uniform where the studs would not be a conductor.
Right, and they've got separation techniques in the walls to keep the studs isolated. And one of those separation techniques is this zip bar product, which has an insulation in it. So instead of just wrapping with plastic, which is a typical building technique, this zip bar product has some insulation value.
So there's two types of foams there, I'm going to interject. You got a closed cell and an open cell foam, and they have different applications in the house. But I mean, essentially, one is better at sealing than the other one is.
Yeah.
But there are places in the house where you don't want the complete seal.
Well, okay, we're going to address that.
Right.
But so the zip bar product prevents the thermal bridging, so that you can't see the studs on an infrared camera. In Fayetteville, all new homes are required to have this kind of audit. And this company actually does an interim test. So before the final test, they do their own test and look for leaks and seal up the leaks. So STIT has that kind of policy. So they actually do go through 2 lower door tests. And you know, they'll seal any leaks they find with foam.
Is that bio-based foam also biodegradable?
I don't know that much about it.
What would it be exposed to the element that is protected?
Well, I don't know, I don't know.
Yeah.
Take the cog out of the
So one thing that you want to do is you want to have good HVAC system. So this one's kind of mid-range, 19 or 20 SEER, and then 8.5 to 10 HSPF, which is the heating side. So it's 2 seasonal ratings, one's for heating, one's for cooling. And this is a tankless water heater, electric tankless water heater. So we don't have any gas line to this house at all. Yes.
I was wondering, if you completely seal a house, how do you ensure that the air
You'll get to that.
There's a definition, I mean, there's a standard for how much air exchange you need. And so we have whisper quiet fans, that metering fans, that provide the amount that's required. So there's a standard as to how much air exchange you need.
Can you tell we can breathe easier in there?
So they do, so the idea is to seal it as well as you can and then provide the metered air exchange that you need. So in the end, the final blower door test that we had was the tightest home that they had ever measured. The company that did the final test. So here's the solar system. That's Flint Richter and his crew. And that's on one part of the house. On the garage, we have another 2.85, and this is reserved for a company that I'm part of. Those 18, there's a spot for 18 more panels. So in Fayetteville, this is the only city that's required to get this HERS index. In Arkansas, yes. The only city in Arkansas. And an existing home would be 130 on this scale. A standard new home would be about 100. This home came in at negative 27 because of the solar panels. You know, it's generating more than what the house needs on its own, and so we use that extra for our cars. We've got electric cars. So here's the result, yeah. 0 bills. Other than, you've got that 876 connect fee.
That's reasonable.
So the solar inverters that we have, Solar Edge, give this kind of report. And so, as of a few weeks ago, we had generated 20 megawatt hours on site. And as of February 22nd, we were at 780 and so on. And this is what our distribution of generation from the system has been.
So that means you make money back?
No, they don't allow you to do that, no. But they bank, it's a net metering arrangement. So over 12 months, they average it out, and then if you still need 4 more months to use up what you banked, they give you those 4 more months to zero it out.
Credit.
But part of what Solar Edge gives you is individual panel by panel production. And we got that at OMNI, so we just need to get it working. figure out how to get it to tell us what we want it to tell us. And then they also give these 2 measures in terms that people like to see. Our house, we have 6 charging stations for electric cars. Why 6? Because we want our friends to be able to charge.
That's too cool.
So this is an example of a charger we have. I had to move it over there because people knocked it over by backing up. Because they like to come to the cross. But there's 6 240 volt charging stations. And they can provide about 10 miles of range for an hour of charging.
So is that where some of your credit goes, is to congregate?
Yes.
That's
right.
cool. So that's getting paid.
Yes. So this is a volt screen, and 160 miles per gallon is, you can't do that in a Prius. Stephen and I have been involved in this project in Fort Smith way back when, that was like 9 years ago or whatever. But that was probably the first church in Arkansas that had a solar system. That's a 16.7 kilowatt system, 78 panels, solar panels. And up to a few years ago, it had generated this 33 megawatt hours. And here's our heroes at the OMNI Center. And of course, we have to have a party. The next project we're involved in is going to be Good Shepherd Lutheran Church. It's going to be an 80 kilowatt system. The installation cost alone, not counting the panels themselves, will be about $432 per panel. And this is the expected production for that system. Now, one thing that's been pretty consistent is that the International Energy Agency and the Energy Information Agency, which is the US equivalent, have consistently predicted these flat future production predictions for 20 years out, 25 years out. And this has been what's actually happened. Agreed. So there's been much more demand than what the International Energy Agency has predicted consistently. And this shows the cost of storage. Lithium-ion batteries were $1,000 per kilowatt hour in 2010. It's come down about 75%. And that continued on into 2017. So the storage, effectively, this is going to replace peaker plants. Natural gas peaker plants, natural gas peakers, because this is already cheaper to have storage, and the solar system is replacing the natural gas peakers. So it's cutting down on natural gas use. If you want to lead building, this is the kind of thing you do. You provide places to charge in the parking lot. So that gets you lead points, like at the Engineering Research Center, where Pica Solar is located, and that's a company I'm involved in. And these are the guys from Pica Solar. We've developed a proprietary manufacturing process that improves the solar cell efficiency and lowers the cost at the same time. So that's one extracurricular thing I'm doing. And this is my favorite bumper sticker. Stefan got it for us. And what if it's a big hoax and we just make the world better? So that's all the slides that I had. I could give you a tour. Yes.
Have you seen that ad on television where it talks about wind energy from Oklahoma being imported into Arkansas?
That's Windcatcher, yeah.
What's that all about?
It's a 2 gigawatt facility in the panhandle of Oklahoma that they're going to bring the power to Tulsa, and 1.4 gigawatts of that will be for SWEPCO. The Tulsa group is an AEP company of a different name, but it's just a different subsidiary than SWEPCO.
Aren't they calling it on that ad or mentioning it being a fraud?
Who is against it?
Yeah,
I don't
someone's
know.
against it, they've got these ads on
Yeah.
TV saying, vote against it.
Well,
Yeah.
part of it is power lines, right?
Yeah, well, it's going to lead to more power lines, and these power lines have a wider footprint than the DC power lines. So, but
And power lines mean pesticides.
yeah,
So that's an issue for a lot of people.
yeah, it is. But the alternative is coal right now.
Or they could bury the power lines.
They could bury the power lines. Germany's doing that. Yeah.
There are alternatives, yeah.
So yeah, you can bury power lines. It makes it more expensive.
Right,
Yes.
initially.
I was wondering about Puerto Rico. I mean, that seems like a natural place to do solar since it's all.
Yeah, I think so too. I would hope for like a microgrid approach for Puerto Rico.
Right.
Yes.
Are your panels made here in America or?
No, most panels are not.
They're made in China?
Well, China, Malaysia, Indonesia, very few are made in the US.
Okay.
But you solar panels, the
Pico Solar, we're trying to get an assembly plant. So we would import the solar cells. Okay. There's 60 of these in a residential panel and 72 of those in a commercial panel, like a utility scale panel. So these are 6 inches by 6 inches. So if we would have to import the cells, treat them with our process, and then assemble them into modules in the US. That's one thing we're trying to work on.
And bring
Yes.
them from where?
Most likely China or Malaysia. The Chinese companies have manufacturing all over the place.
Do those imported cells have the 30% tariff on them, or?
Yeah, that's what I
They
was
would.
gonna ask. Yeah, they would.
Yeah, but that would just be the cells. We would add value with our process and with putting it in modules.
Are there any like American companies that are doing that? I've kind of
There's
followed
Solar World
e-commerce
and
with
Sediva,
that,
but they've
so-
both gone bankrupt.
Okay.
Is it because we don't have the raw materials?
Very cheap labor.
Well, it's more a conditions. China has invested tremendous amounts in their supply chain. So they just have made a very efficient supply chain, and that's hard to compete with. They're the incumbent right now.
Terry,
Yes.
Ozark Electric is selling shares in its wind farm. Is that on the level?
Well, no, I think it's a solar farm. I think it's the 1 megawatt solar plant
Oh,
in
it's solar.
Springdale, I think.
Is China subsidizing their solar? Is that what the deal is, as far as where you need a commitment to this? 'Cause
Maybe.
we have.
I don't, that's a really complex question to,
I think they did initially, but I doubt if they're doing that now.
Yeah,
They
no.
don't have to.
No, but they have such a pollution problem, they're having a really big push to
Right.
alternatives.
Yeah,
But
Yeah.
it helps if the government makes, as with the tax subsidies of, what is it, 2007?
They've set the right conditions.
Probably made it push for being more solar independent, because
Yeah,
it's
and wind.
incentive.
They're big into solar and wind.
Yeah.
They're bigger than anybody else in the world. But last year, there was about 98 gigawatts of solar installed, and, okay, let's go back to this. So 98 gigawatt, this is what they were predicting for 2017. The reality is up higher, what actually happened for 2017. But of that, 53 gigawatts is staying in China. So China is really putting a big emphasis on both solar and wind. And they're taking the lion's share of the supply.
it sounds as if they don't believe that climate change is a Chinese hoax.
No, not at all.
It isn't, it's the
And,
US.
and they don't believe that the smog that they're breathing is fake either.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's the thing.
So, other questions, or do we want to take a tour?
Yeah,
So what made a big difference between, 40-something years ago, when the White House was taking down the solar panels off the White House, was it like killing the electric car? Were they basically just, here we are reinventing ourselves, the technology's not changed that much, so why is the government?
The technology's changed a lot.
Yeah.
Well, they could have left those up there, it would have gone even faster, the technology would have gone even faster.
The solar panels that Carter put up, I believe, were for heating water. I don't think they were
Again, if they
solar
had been
electric.
given a chance,
Yeah.
that would have been
Yeah,
exponential.
there were like,
I mean,
there
it's
were
changed.
PV panels on the White House
Did they?
with Carter.
Well, the point being is they flipped it to where, like the electric car, they said, just kill it.
Yeah.
And it could have gone a lot further.
Is there any intimate legislation that would impact this heavily, like tax credits?
Yeah, there's
away?
always
Are there-
stuff.
are there, what's
They
on now?
protected the tax credits in the US. But then Trump came through with his tariff.
Well, isn't one of the biggest things right now of the solar panels and grandfathering in to the SWEPCO?
Well, that's a state thing.
Well, but that's,
That's where we are, that's just state, so that's where we are.
Molly?
When you all were talking a moment ago about when we do big power lines from Oklahoma for the wind energy, and it means more herbicides, I just want to mention something that those of us who are at the headwaters of the Buffalo River are fighting right now. U.S. Forest Service District, Big Piney, St. Francis, that goes all the way from Searcy County all the way over to the Oklahoma line. They're projecting for 2018 a proposal called roadside vegetation, so that all lands in U.S. Forest Service hands, all roads on those lands, whether they're dirt roads or highways, will be sprayed with herbicides. So I suggest all of you get in touch with Big Piney, St. Francis National Forest Service and tell them you object to herbicides being sprayed. Because right now it's in a public comment moment where we can say we don't like that proposal. By law, they must allow us to comment. And there have been meetings for one of the 3 projects out in the rural counties that we've been going to. And so they have public comment is open now and until Thursday of this week, March 8th. And so if you get your word in there right away to say you don't want herbicides on all those U.S. forest lands within the Big Piney St. Francis district, they have to pay attention whether they change their proposal or not, but they have to listen to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Lolly.
Lolly, one
Yeah.
question.
Sure.
What is their justification for this?
Invasive species.
Um,
And they say Japanese stiltgrass, Paulownia as a tree, and, oh, there's another Sericea lespedeza, which many people plant. Then there's another tree, golden something tree that pops up as a weed species tree in a lot of places. It's very tricky and very involved. There are lots of their reasonings versus a lot of our reasonings. There are other things they're going to be doing, which are cutting hardwood forests, which I rile at, and they're burning thousands of acres as well.
And Stefan's favorite is Bartlett pears, of course. Favorite to get rid of.
Gary, I do have a question. This has been on my mind ever since Gary Mechanic mentioned it, that there actually aren't enough heavy metals available to build all of the solar panels required to replace.
There are no heavy metals in the solar panels. There's only one kind. There's, the first solar has a type that's cadmium tellurium.
Yeah.
And cadmium tellurium are toxic, but there's only one company that produces that, and not the Chinese companies. The vast majority, 95% of the panels out on the market are silicon based.
Okay.
Silicon.
Yes.
So that's not really true then about that, okay.
It
And so
was
we-
once, but, you know, that was the initial, and now they've changed to the more environmentally safe and sound one.
Okay,
The worst part of the silver grid lines are the second most costly part of silicon solar cells. Silicon being the most expensive part. But our process reduces the number of silver grid lines that are needed, or they can be farther apart.
so resources to build solar panels are not something that we have to worry about. There would be enough to build.
There's plenty of silicon. Silver can be a problem, but companies are investigating copper for the grid lines. You know, there's lots of things going on, but you know, right now the standard way they're produced is with silver.
Okay.
Silver grid lines.
But what I read somewhere, and I don't remember the details about your concern is that once the lifetime of the solar panels is over, then
How do you get rid of it?
how to get rid of them? Whether recycle would be difficult because of the multiple components within the cell to take them apart, or obviously the other part, which could be landfill or something like that.
Well, like, all of the companies have recycling systems, but they're only as good as the company surviving. You know? So like First Solar, they have a recycling program for their cadmium tellurium, but they've downgraded that product. You know, there's when you have a wind farm, sometimes the local code requires you to set aside enough money to take it apart when it's at the end of life.
Is that a mandate or is that an ethical choice?
It depends on the local law. But a lot of the solar manufacturing companies are doing similar things, but they're only as good as the company surviving. Yes.
What is the lifetime of a solar cell?
Some are 60 years old and still generating.
Okay.
And those are the ones I was talking about.
The rating, they're warranted for a lifetime of 25 years.
Okay.
So the 80 to 83% production at 25 years. Oops.
The drop-off in power consumption is steepest in the first few years, and then it levels out, and it changes very little after 25 years.
And many of the top-end solar panels are 0 to 5% plus. So they used to be like negative 2.5 to positive 2.5. Now they're binning them so that they're exceeding, you know, that they're on the high side of the bin.
So planned obsolescence isn't in their formula of profit?
No.
But when you say company's survival, like in terms of either wind or solar panel production, is that, and maybe it's not, is that like the companies that we've had here in Fayetteville that were chemical companies that didn't survive, in quotes, in that they changed their name and moved off, leaving barrels of toxic chemicals in their warehouse? So do they just change their name at the end of 25 years and they're off the hook? Is that how that works?
Well, but there's inherent value in the silicon and the silver.
Right.
You know, there's inherent value in taking these apart. It's a concentrated source for recycling.
I have a couple of questions about electric cars. The batteries in electric cars are lithium mostly. And what's the useful life of one of those?
About 10 years. You know, it depends on usage. It depends. Most of the companies are keeping them well within a tight range, so that if nominally it's a 16 kilowatt hour battery like in the Volt, they only allow it to use 10 kilowatt hours of that range. They don't let it get overcharged and they don't let it get undercharged, and they control the thermal aspects of it. They have a cooling system.
Is that a strictly electric or a hybrid as well?
Well, a Volt is a plug-in hybrid.
Well, I have another
It's
question.
the electric component.
Is all this electric cars might put a hurt on the copper supply, and is there some other, like I know aluminum, you can make wires out of aluminum.
I hear, the things I hear concerns about are cobalt, but there are alternatives for I always get them mixed up, the cathode and anode. I think it's the cathode that's tends to be cobalt, but there are other formulations that can reduce the amount of cobalt needed to a sixth of what's the current design for some cars. But cobalt is a nasty chemical, and it's hard to get a hold of, and there's a lot of issues with it. But there are alternatives.
What about the copper? I always worried about copper.
No, I don't think copper is the biggest concern. I think the biggest concern is cobalt that I read about.
So are you seeing a trend where, it used to be, or maybe it still is, that people were encouraged to rent the panels? And then now people are saying, no, I want to build my home with my panels on it. So is there any kind of incentive or a reason why they would push one way or the other?
Well, if you've got the cash up front, it's better to buy. You know, if you don't have the cash up front, or if you can't get a good loan, and the company will lease them to you favorably, and you don't have to put a lot of money up front, it can make sense. Like for instance,
Give me the last place you look.
yeah, always is. Okay. So this system will give about 10% return on investment.
Is that Shepherd or Good Shepherd?
Yeah, Good Shepherd.
Per year?
Yes. So, you know, that, working churches make 10% on their own. So from a standpoint of investment, it makes sense. And when I gave this talk at Good Shepherd, I emphasized the moral aspects, which includes the refugee issue. You know, because at Good Shepherd, they started Canopy around here. And so they're very concerned about the refugee issue. So that was a tie-in.
Terry,
Yes.
this is a question that maybe you don't want to address right now, but just a short version, please. How much did you put into preparing for tornadoes? When you put all that into this beautiful thing, how sound is it?
Suzanne Lance, the architect, says this is like a brick outhouse. You know, that it's built very solidly. The columns are down to the ground like 8 to 10, 12 feet. She has every confidence. I mean, if that big tree falls on us, that would be a problem, but
Is that a city ordinance that you had to keep that, or was it just ethically you wanted to?
well, they don't absolutely protect any individual tree, but you get credit. There's a differential value, so that's a 30-inch oak, and we've got a 30-inch elm in front. So those are considered significant trees. So they get a different classification. If you want to take one of those out, it's a you know, you have to go through a lot more hoops and do a lot more replanting or mitigation.
Understandable.
So it's better, you know, a tree like that you just want to protect.
Aubrey, are you suggesting that we should be concerned about tornadoes?
Well, if I were 27 years old instead of 77, I figured there was a chance a tornado would come in my lifetime, and I would like to be prepared, just as I'd like to have solar. And that's why I brought up that question. I figured you did have a lot of it.
Flint's been in the industry for 18 years, and his mentor was in the industry for 30 years, and neither of them ever had a hail damaged solar panel.
I had a
So
hail
there's-
damaged solar panel. I lived off the grid for 25 years and I lost one panel.
One panel?
To a 3-inch hailstone.
Wow.
Wow, guess you're lucky, man.
But his experience has been replacing, he has to, when there's hail damage to the roof, he's got to take the solar panels off so that they can replace the roof and he can put it back on. But, you know, underneath where the panels are, it's protected. And when we looked at, you know, metal roof is great, but the roofer that I talked to said that those can get pockmarked. And so, you know, you're paying 2 or 3 times, but they last forever as long as you don't,
Look at
as long as there's not a problem, yeah.
We'll get there, look at them.
Yes,
Terry, another thing we noticed with our solar panels that no one had warned us about is that the dripping from the trees, the oak stuff, dirt, everything like that can cover your panels and really lessen the amount of.
I definitely see more production after a rain. And it, yeah, as you get pollen, it affects the production, definitely. So that's true.
Well, you have a sprinkler system set up to watch out for. There's no
Cloudy days like today, how do you get good generation on a day when the sun is behind the clouds?
Well, let's see.
Probably make
We can see it's cloudy.
probably make 10 kilowatt hours per part today,
No, probably more than that.
more than that.
8.9 kilowatt hours so far.
I guess that's pretty good, isn't it?
No, it's not. 80 is, if it were a clear day, it would be 80.
Oh, my, okay. Well, something's going through anyway.
All right, any other questions, or do we want to take the little tour?
Let's take the tour.
Okay.
Thank you to Margaret and Terry for